Howdy, 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 my name is Anachi Sasuke, and welcome back to whatever it is I'm going to call the playlist where I'm reading H.P. Lovecraft things. Um, in the last episode, I know we did the creepy marsh story, where was it? The Moonbog, and I don't remember what the other one was. I think it was the cat one. The Cats of Ulthar, yeah. You may notice that there's a bunch of purple things of me having already clicked on stuff. I was trying to decide what ones to cover for this time around. I want to find some shorter ones instead of the behemoths that are things like the Call of Cthulhu and whatnot. And I find myself wondering, how many of H.P. Lovecraft's things are actually about Cthulhu? Is it just the one thing? Because I've heard of more of these than I thought I had, and I just sort of assumed they were all Cthulhu. Like, I obviously the Call of Cthulhu, but I assumed that the Dunwich Horror and Shadow over Innsmouth were also Cthulhu-based? But it doesn't sound like it. But all of those are also really, really long, so if I were to cover any of those, they would be multiple episodes on their own. So if anybody wants me to read those, let me know. I might do it anyway, but I figure I'd at least ask you guys first, so that if any of you were even watching this enough to give me some input, I would at least like to know if anybody is gonna care before I put in the time to actually do it. So, the ones I chose are The Mysterious Ship, The Terrible Old Man, and Hypnos. I chose Mysterious Ship because it's weirdly short, and it's kind of funny to me how short it was. I don't know if clicking short version, long version takes me to different parts of the page. Yeah, it does. So, short version. The Royal Press, 1902. Chapter 1. In the spring of 1847, the little village of Ruralville was thrown into a state of excitement by the arrival of a strange brig in the harbor. It carried no flag, and everything about it was such as would excite suspicion. It had no name. Its captain was named Manuel Ruello. The excitement increased, however, when John Griggs disappeared from his home. This was October the 4th. On October 5th, the brig was gone. Chapter 2. The brig, in leaving, was met by a U.S. frigate, and a sharp fight ensued. When over, they missed a man named Henry Johns. The frigate missed a man. Chapter 3. The brig continued its course in the direction of Madagascar. Upon its arrival, the natives fled in all directions. When they came together on the other side of the island, one was missing. His name was Dabea. Chapter 4. At length it was decided that something must be done. A reward of £5,000 was offered for the capture of Manuel Ruello. When a startling news came, a nameless brig was wrecked on the Florida Keys. Chapter 5. A ship was sent to Florida and the mystery was solved. In the excitement of the fight, they would launch a submarine boat and take what they wanted. There it lay, tranquilly rocking on the waters of the Atlantic when someone called out, "John Brown has disappeared!" And sure enough, John Brown was gone. The finding of the submarine boat and the disappearance of John Brown caused renewed excitement amongst the people when a new discovery was made. In transcribing this discovery, it is necessary to relate a geographical fact. At the North Pole, there exists a vast continent composed of volcanic soil, a portion of which is open to explorers. It is called No Man's Land. Pretty sure that's the opposite of what's at the North Pole, but okay. Chapter 7. In the extreme southern part of No Man's Land, there was found a hut, and several other signs of human habitation. They promptly entered and chained to the floor like Griggs, Johns, and Dabea. They, upon arriving in London, separated, Griggs going to Ruralville, Johns to the frigate, and Dabea to Madagascar. But the mystery of John Brown was still unsolved, so they kept strict watch over the port at No Man's Land, and when the submarine boat arrived, and the pirates, one by one, and headed by Manuel Ruello, left the ship, they were met by a rapid fire. After the fight, Brown was recovered. Griggs was royally received at Ruralville, and a dinner was given in honor of Henry Johns. Dabea was made king of Madagascar, and Brown was made captain of his ship. The end. Long version by Anonymous. In the spring of 1847, the little village of Ruralville was thrown into a state of excitement by the landing of a strange brig in the harbor. Okay, the long version has excitement spelled the right way. That's a weird change to make. It carried no flag, and no name was painted on the side, and everything about it was such as would excite suspicion. It was from Tripoli, Africa, and the captain was named Manuel Ruello. The excitement increased, however, when John Griggs, the magnate of the village, suddenly disappeared from his home. This was on the night of October 4th. On October 5th, the brig left. It was 8 bells on the U.S. frigate Constitution when Commander Farragut sighted a strange brig to the westward. It carried no flag, and no name was painted on its side, and everything about it was such as would excite suspicion. On hailing it, put up the pirate's flag. Farragut ordered a gun fired, and no sooner did he fire than the pirate ship gave them a broadside. When the fight was over, Commander Farragut missed one man named Henry F. Johns. It was summer on the island of Madagascar, and the natives were picking corn, when one cried, "Companions, I sight a ship, with no flag, and with no name printed on the side, and with everything about it such as would excite suspicion." And the natives fled in all directions. When they came together on the other side of the island, one was missing by his name, Dahabea. At length it was decided something must be done. Notes were compared. 3 abductions were found to have taken place. Disappearance of John Griggs, Henry John, and Dahabea were recalled. Finally, advertisements were issued offering £5,000 reward for the capture of Manuel Ruello, ship, prisoners, and crew. When exciting news reached London, an unknown brig with no name was wrecked on the Florida Keys in America. The people hurried to Florida and beheld blank. A steel spindle-shaped object lay placidly on the water beside the shattered wreck of the brig. "A submarine boat!" shouted one. "Yes!" shouted another. "The mystery is cleared," said a wise-looking man. In the excitement of the fight, they launched the submarine boat and take as many as they wish, unseen. And "John Brown has disappeared!" shouted a voice from the deck. Sure enough, John Brown was gone. The finding of the submarine boat and the disappearance of John Brown caused renewed excitement among the people, and a new discovery was made. In relating this discovery, it is necessary to relate a geographical fact. At the North Pole, there is supposed to exist a vast, unfruitful, and thus absolutely impassable. I missed something. A vast continent composed of volcanic soil. A portion is open to travelers and explorers, but it is barren and unfruitful, and thus absolutely impassable. There we go. It is called No Man's Land. In the extreme southern part of No Man's Land, there was found a wharf and a hut, and, see, every sign of former human habitation. The rusty door plate was nailed to the hut, inscribed in Old English, M. Ruello. This, then, was the home of Where did Michael come from? I thought his name was Manuel. Michael Ruello. The house brought to light a notebook belonging to John Griggs, and the log of the Constitution taken from Henry Johns, and the Madagascar Reaper belonging to Dahabea. When about to leave, they observed a spring on the side of the hut. They pressed it. A hole appeared in the side of the hut, which they promptly entered. They were in a subterranean cavern. The beach ran down to the edge of a black, murky sea. On the sea lay a dark, oblong object. It is another submarine boat which they entered. There, bound to the cabin floor, lay Griggs, Johns, and Dahabea, all alive and well. They, when arriving in London, separated, Griggs going to Ruralville, Johns to the Constitution, and Dahabea to Madagascar. But the mystery of John Brown lay still unsolved, so they kept strict watch over the port at No Man's Land, hoping the submarine boat would arrive. At length, however, it did arrive, bearing with it John Brown. They fixed upon the 5th of October for the attack. They ranged along the shore and formed bodies. Finally, one by one, and headed by Manuel Ruello, the pirates left the boat. They were, to their astonishment, met by a rapid fire. Chapter X, the conclusion. The pirates were at length defeated, and a search was made for Brown. At length he, the aforesaid Brown, was found. John Gregg was royally received at Ruralville, and a dinner was blank. Dahabea was made king of Madagascar, and Manuel Ruello was executed at Newgate Prison. The end. There was quite a lot of different things in the long version than the short version. Why was there even a short-long version? Why did they do that? I don't know. But anyway, now it's time for the terrible old man. It was the design of Angelo Ricci and Joe Zanuck and Manuel Silva. There's another Manuel, or maybe let's go with Manuel, to call on the terrible old man. This old man dwells all alone in a very ancient house on Water Street near the sea, and is reputed to be both exceedingly rich and exceedingly feeble, which forms a situation very attractive to men of the profession of Messrs. Ricci, Zanuck, and Silva, for that profession was nothing less dignified than robbery. Thought they were going to say lawyers. The inhabitants of Kingsport say and think many things about the terrible old man, which generally keep him safe from the attention of gentlemen, like Mr. Ricci and his colleagues, despite the almost certain fact that he hides a fortune of indefinite magnitude somewhere about his musty and venerable abode. He is, in truth, a very strange person, believed to have been a captain of East India clipper ships in his day, so old that no one can remember when he was young, and so taciturn that few know his real name. Among the gnarled trees in the front yard of his aged and neglected place, he maintains a strange collection of large stones, oddly grouped and painted so that they resemble the idols in some obscure Eastern temple. This collection frightens away most small boys who love to taunt the terrible old man about his long white hair and beard, or to break the small paned windows of his dwelling with wicked missiles. But there are other things which frighten the older and more curious folk who sometimes steal up to the old house to peer in through the dusty panes. These folks say that on a table in a bare room on the ground floor are many peculiar bottles, in each a small piece of lead suspended pendulum-wise from a string. And they say that the terrible old man talks to these bottles, addressing them by such names as Jack, Scarface, Long Tom, Spanish Joe, Peters, and Mate Ellis, and that whenever he speaks to a bottle, the little lead pendulum within makes a certain definite vibrations as if in answer. Those who have watched the tall, lean, terrible old man in these peculiar conversations do not watch him again, but Angelo Ricci and Joe Zenek and Manuel Silva were not of Kingsport blood. They were of that new and heterogeneous alien stock which lies outside the charmed circle of New England life and traditions, and they saw in the terrible old man merely a tottering, almost helpless graybeard, who could not walk without the aid of his knotted cane, and whose thin, weak hand shook pitifully. They were really quite sorry in their way for the lonely, unpopular old fellow whom everybody shunned, and at whom all the dogs barked singularly. But business is business, and to a robber whose soul is in his profession, there is a lure and a challenge about a very old and a very feeble man who has no account at the bank, and who pays for his few necessities at the village store with Spanish gold and silver minted 2 centuries ago. Messrs. Ricci, Zenek, and Silva selected the night of April 11th for their call. Mr. Ricci and Mr. Silva were to interview the poor old gentleman, whilst Mr. Zenek waited for them and their presumable metallic burden with a covered motor car in Ship Street, by the gate in the tall rear wall of their host's grounds. Desire to avoid needless explanations in case of unexpected police intrusions prompted these plans for a quiet and unostentatious departure. As prearranged, the 3 adventurers started out separately in order to prevent any evil-minded suspicions afterwards. Messrs. Ricci and Silva met in Water Street by the old man's front gate, and although they did not like the way the moon shone down upon the painted stones through the budding branches of the gnarled trees, they had more important things to think about than mere idle superstition. They feared it might be unpleasant work making the terrible old man loquacious concerning his hoarded gold and silver, for aged sea captains are notably stubborn and perverse. Still, he was very old and very feeble, and there were 2 visitors. Messrs. Ricci and Silva were experienced in the art of making unwilling persons voluble, and the screams of a weak and exceptionally venerable man can be easily muffled. So they moved up to the one lighted window and heard the terrible old man talking childishly to his bottles with pendulums. Then they donned masks and knocked politely at the weather-stained oaken door. Waiting seemed very long to Mr. Zenek as he fidgeted restlessly in his covered motor car by the terrible old man's back gate in Ship Street. He was more than ordinarily tender-hearted, and he did not like the hideous screams he had heard in the ancient house just after the hour appointed for the deed. Had he not told his colleagues to be as gentle as possible with the pathetic old sea captain? Very nervously he watched that narrow oaken gate in the high and ivy-clad stone wall. Frequently he consulted his watch and wondered at the delay. Had the old man died before revealing where his treasure was hidden, and had a thorough search become necessary? Mr. Zenek did not like to wait so long in the dark in such a place. Then he sensed a soft tread or tapping on the walk inside the gate, heard a gentle fumbling at the rusty latch, and saw the narrow, heavy door swing inward. And in the pallid glow of the single dim street lamp, he strained his eyes to see what his colleagues had brought out of that sinister house, which loomed so close behind. But when he looked, he did not see what he had expected, for his colleagues were not there at all, but only the terrible old man, leaning quietly on his knotted cane and smiling hideously. Mr. Zenek had never before noticed the color of that man's eyes. Now he saw that they were yellow. Little things make considerable excitement in little towns, which is the reason that Kingsport people talked all that spring and summer about the 3 unidentifiable bodies, horribly slashed as with many cutlasses, and horribly mangled as by the thread of many cruel boot heels, which the tide washed in. And some people even spoke of things as trivial as the deserted motor car found on Ship Street, where certain, especially inhuman cries, possibly of a stray animal or migratory bird, heard in the night by wakeful citizens. But in this idle village gossip, the terrible old man took no interest at all. He was by nature reserved, and when one is aged and feeble, one's reserve is doubly strong. He was by nature he already said that. Besides, so ancient a sea captain must have witnessed scores of things much more stirring in the far-off days of his unremembered youth. Okay, so it sounds like they tried to rob him and he just stopped them. Violently stopped them. It also sounds like the things in the bottles might have helped. Okay, this one is Hypnos, and it says 2SL. Apropos of sleep, that sinister adventure of all our nights, we may say that men go to bed daily with an audacity that would be incomprehensible if we did not know that it is the result of ignorance of the danger. By Baudelaire, whoever that is. May the merciful gods, if indeed there be such, guard those hours when no power of the will or drug that the cunning of man devises can keep me from the chasm of sleep. Death is merciful, for there's no return therefrom, but with him who has come back out of the nethermost chambers of night, haggard and knowing, peace rests nevermore. Fool that I was to plunge with such unsanctioned frenzy into mysteries no man was meant to penetrate. Fool or god that he was. My only friend, who led me and went before me, and who in the end passed into terrors which may yet be mine. We met, I recall, in a railway station, where he was the center of a crowd of the vulgarly curious. He was unconscious, having fallen in a kind of convulsion, which imparted to his slight black-clad body a strange rigidity. I think he was then approaching 40 years of age, for there were deep lines in the face, wan and hollow-cheeked, but oval and actually beautiful, and touches of gray in the thick waving hair, and a small full beard which had once been of the deepest raven black. His brow was white as the marble of Pentelicus, and of a height and breadth almost godlike. I said to myself with all the ardor of a sculptor that this man was a fawn statue out of antique Hellas, dug from a temple's ruins and brought somehow to life in our stifling age, only to feel the chill and pressure of devastating years. And when he opened his immense, sunken, and wildly luminous black eyes, I knew he would be thenceforth my only friend, the only friend of one who had never possessed a friend before, for I saw that such eyes must have looked fully upon the grandeur and the terror of realms beyond normal consciousness and reality, realms which I had cherished in fancy, but vainly sought. So as I drove the crowd away, I told him he must come home with me and be my teacher and leader in unfathomed mysteries, and he assented without speaking a word. Afterwards, I found that his voice was music, the music of deep viols and of crystalline spheres. We talked often in the night and in the day, when I chiseled busts of him and carved miniature heads in ivory to immortalize his different expressions. Okay. Of our studies it is impossible to speak, since they held so slight a connection with anything of the world as living men conceive it. They were of that vaster and more appalling universe of dim entity and consciousness which lies deeper than matter, time, and space, and whose existence we suspect only in certain forms of sleep. Those rare dreams beyond dreams which come never to common men, and but once or twice in the lifetime of imaginative men. The cosmos of our waking knowledge, born from such a universe as a bubble is born from the pipe of a jester, touches it only as such a bubble may touch a sardonic source when sucked back by the jester's whim. Men of learning suspect it little and ignore it mostly. Wise men have interpreted dreams, and gods have laughed. One man with oriental eyes has said that all time and space are relative, and men have laughed. But even that man with oriental eyes has done no more than suspect. I had wished and tried to do more than suspect, and my friend had tried and partly succeeded. Then we both tried together, and with exotic drugs courted terrible and forbidden dreams in the tower studio chamber of the old manor house in Horry, Kent. Among the agonies of these after days is that chief of torments, inarticulateness. What I learned and saw in those hours of impious exploration can never be told, for want of symbols or suggestions in any language. I say this because from first to last our discoveries partook only of the nature of sensations. sensations correlated with no impression which the nervous system of normal humanity is capable of receiving. They were sensations, yet within them lay unbelievable elements of humanity, elements of time and space, things which at bottom possess no distinct or definite existence. Human utterance can best convey the general character of our experiences by calling them plungings or soarings. For in every period of revelation, some part of our minds broke boldly away from all that is real and present, rushing aerially along shocking, unlighted, and fear-haunted abysses, and occasionally tearing through certain well-marked and typical obstacles describable only as viscous, uncouth clouds or vapors. In these black and bodiless flights, we were sometimes alone and sometimes together. When we were together, my friend was always far ahead. I could comprehend his presence despite the absence of form, by a species of pictorial memory whereby his face appeared to me, golden from a strange light and frightful with its weird beauty, and its anomalously youthful cheeks, its burning eyes, its Olympian brow, and its shadowing hair and growth of beard. Of the progress of time we kept no record, for time had become to us the merest illusion. I know only that there must have been something very singularly involved, since we came at length to marvel why we did not grow old. Our discourse was unholy and always hideously ambitious. No god or demon could have aspired to discoveries or conquests like those which we planned in whispers. I shiver as I speak of them, and dare not be explicit, though I will say that my friend once wrote on paper a wish which he dared not utter with his tongue, and which made me burn the paper and look affrightedly out of the window at the spangled night sky. I will hint, only hint, that he had designs which involved the rulership of the visible universe and more. Designs whereby the earth and the stars would move at his command, and the destinies of all living things be his. I affirm, I swear, that I had no share in these extreme aspirations. Anything my friend may have said or written to the contrary must be erroneous, for I am no man of strength to risk the unmentionable warfare and unmentionable spheres by which alone one might achieve success. There was a night when winds from unknown spaces whirled us irresistibly into limitless vacua beyond all thought and entity. Perceptions of the most maddeningly untransmissible sort thronged upon us. Perceptions of infinity which at the time convulsed us with joy, yet which are now partly lost to my memory and partly incapable of presentation to others. Viscous obstacles were clawed through in rapid succession, and at length I felt that we had been borne to realms of greater remoteness than any we had previously known. My friend was vastly in advance as we plunged into this awesome ocean of virgin aether, and I could see the sinister exultation on his floating, luminous, too youthful memory face. Suddenly that face became dim and quickly disappeared, and in a brief space I found myself projected against an obstacle which I could not penetrate. It was like the others, yet incalculably denser, a sticky, clammy mass, if such terms can be applied to analogous qualities in a non-material sphere. I felt, been halted by a barrier which my friend and leader had successfully passed. Struggling anew, I came to the end of the drug dream and opened my physical eyes to the tower studio, in whose opposite corner reclined the pallid and still unconscious form of my fellow dreamer, weirdly haggard and wildly beautiful as the moon shed gold-green light on his marble features. Then, after a short interval, the form in the corner stirred, and may pitying heaven keep from my sight and sound another thing like that which took place before me. I cannot tell you how he shrieked, or what vistas of unvisitable hells gleamed for a second in black eyes crazed with fright. I can only say that I fainted, and did not stir till he himself recovered, and shook me in his frenzy for someone to keep away the horror and desolation. That was the end of our voluntary searchings in the caverns of dream. Awed, shaken, and portentous, my friend who had been beyond the barrier warned me that we must never venture within those realms again. What he had seen he dared not tell me, but he said from his wisdom that we must sleep as little as possible, even if drugs were necessary to keep us awake. That he was right I soon learned from the unutterable fear which engulfed me whenever consciousness lapsed. After each short and inevitable sleep I seemed older, whilst my friend aged with a rapidity almost shocking. It is hideous to see wrinkles form and hair whiten almost before one's eyes. Our mode of life was now totally altered. Heretofore a recluse so far as I know, his true name and origin never having passed his lips, My friend now became frantic in his fear of solitude. At night he would not be alone, nor would the company of a few persons calm him. His sole relief was obtained in revelry of the most general and boisterous sort, so that few assemblies of the young and the gay were unknown to us. Our appearance and age seemed to excite, in most cases, a ridicule which I keenly resented, but which my friend considered a lesser evil than solitude. Especially was he afraid to be out of doors alone when the stars were shining, and if forced to this condition, he would often glance furtively at the sky, as if hunted by some monstrous thing therein. He did not always glance at the same place in the sky. It seemed to be a different place at different times. On spring evenings it would be low in the northeast. In the summer it would be nearly overhead. In the autumn it would be in the northwest. In winter it would be in the east, but mostly in the small hours of morning. Midwinter evenings seemed least dreadful to him. Only after 2 years did I connect this fear with anything in particular, but then I began to see that he must be looking at a special spot on the celestial vault, whose position at different times corresponded to the direction of his glance. A spot roughly marked by the constellation Corona Borealis. We now had a studio in London, never separating, but never discussing the days when we had sought to plumb the mysteries of the unreal world. We were aged and weak from our drugs, dissipations and nervous overstrain, and the thinning hair and beard of my friend had become snow white. Our freedom from long sleep was surprising, for seldom did we succumb more than an hour or two at a time to the shadow which had now grown so frightful a menace. Then came one January of fog and rain, when money ran low and drugs were hard to buy. My statues and ivory heads were all sold, and I had no means to purchase new materials or energy to fashion them even had I possessed them. We suffered terribly, and on a certain night, my friend sank into a deep breathing sleep from which I could not awaken him. I can recall the scene now. The desolate, pitch-black garret studio under the eaves with the rain beating down, the ticking of the lone clock, the fancy ticking of our watches as they rested on the dressing table, the creaking of some swaying shutter in a remote part of the house, certain distant city noises muffled by fog and space, and worst of all, the deep, steady, sinister breathing of my friend on the couch. A rhythmical breathing which seemed to measure moments of supernal fear and agony for his spirit as it wandered in spheres forbidden, unimagined, and hideously remote. The tension of my vigil became oppressive, and a wild train of trivial impressions and associations thronged through my almost unhinged mind. I heard a clock strike somewhere, not ours, for that was not a striking clock, and my morbid fancy found in this a new starting point for idle wanderings. Clocks, time, space, infinity. And then my fancy reverted to the local as I reflected that even now, beyond the roof and the fog and the rain and the atmosphere, Corona Borealis was rising in the northeast. Corona Borealis, which my friend had appeared to dread, and whose scintillant semicircle of stars must even now be glowing unseen to the measureless abysses of ether. All at once my feverishly sensitive ears seemed to detect a new and wholly distinct component in the soft medley of drug-magnified sounds. A low and damnably insistent whine from very far away. Droning, clamoring, mocking, calling from the northeast. But it was not that distant whine which robbed me of my faculties and set upon my soul such a seal of fright as may never in life be removed. Not that which drew the shrieks and excited the convulsions which caused lodgers and police to break down the door. It was not what I heard, but what I saw. For in that dark, locked, shuttered, and curtained room, there appeared from the black northeast corner a shaft of horrible red gold light. A shaft which bore with it no glow to disperse the darkness, but which streamed only upon the recumbent head of the troubled sleeper, bringing out in hideous duplication the luminous and strangely youthful memory face I had known it in dreams of abysmal space and unshackled time, when my friend had pushed behind the barrier to those secret, innermost, and forbidden caverns of nightmares. And as I looked, I beheld the head rise, the black, liquid and deep sunken eyes open in terror, and the thin, shadowed lips part as if for a scream too frightful to be uttered. There dwelt in that ghastly and flexible face, as it shone bodiless, luminous, and rejuvenated in the blackness, more of stark, teeming, brain-shattering fear than all the rest of heaven and earth has ever revealed to me. No word was spoken amidst the distant sound that grew nearer and nearer, but as I followed the memory face's mad stare along that cursed shaft of light to its source, the source whence also the whining came, I too saw for an instant what it saw, and fell with ringing ears in that fit of shrieking and epilepsy which brought the lodgers and the police. Never could I tell, try as I might, what it actually was that I saw. Nor could the still face tell, for although it must have seen more than I did, it will never speak again. But although I shall guard against the mocking and insatiate Hypnos, Lord of Sleep, against the night sky, and against the mad ambitions of knowledge and philosophy. Just what happened is unknown, for not only was my own mind unseated by the strange and hideous thing, but others were tainted with a forgetfulness which can mean nothing if not madness. They have said, I know not for what reason, that I never had a friend, but that art, philosophy, and insanity had filled all my tragic life. The lodgers and police on that night soothed me, and the doctor administered something to quiet me, nor did anyone see what a nightmare event had taken place. My stricken friend moved them to no pity, but what they found on the couch in the studio made them give me a praise which sickened me, and now a fame which I spurn in despair as I sit for hours, bald, grey-bearded, shriveled, palsied, drug-crazy, and broken, adorning and praying to the object they found. For they deny that I sold the last of my statuary, and point with ecstasy at the thing which the shining shaft of light left cold, petrified, and unvocal. It is all that remains of my friend, the friend who led me on the path to madness and wreckage, a godlike head of such marvel as only Hellas could yield, young with the youth that is outside time, and with beauteous bearded face, curved smiling lips, Olympian brow, and dense locks waving and poppy-crowned. They say that the haunting memory face is modeled from my own, as it was at 25, but upon the marble bases carving a single name in the letters of Attica. I'm not sure what the name is. Let's Google it. Let's see. I was about to say it probably means Hypnos. Okay, so that was insane, but really fun to read. So that about does it for, once again, whatever it is I'm calling this series of reading H.P. Lovecraft things. Who knows what's going to be in the next one, if there's even going to be a next one. If you want there to be a next one, let me know. So this has been Anashi Sasuke. If you liked it, a like to subscribe will be groovy. If you did join it, do either one of those things, and I will see y'all on the next one. Later.